So hope you enjoyed the meal, and more importantly, you enjoyed the coffee that, according to Danielle, is supposed to be of good quality. This will be very important for the beginning of this afternoon session. So following the organization of the morning, now we are going to focus on application areas. So in the previous session, we were more focusing on the scientific challenge, while now the focus will be on application areas. And in particular, as we discussed this morning, fragmentation is one of the key issues to be addressed. So in this session, what we ask the speakers is to provide their own personal interpretation of social collective intelligence in specific application areas. And this should be stimulating for understanding what can be done, what can be reused, and what can be replicated in order to progress this field. So we will have 4 speeches. The first one will be given by Professor Wolfgang Nejdl, who's head and executive director of L3S Research Center in Hanover. He's also editor-in-chief of the IEEE Transactions on Learning Technologies, as well as part of the editorial board of various international journals, such as the ICM Transactions on the Web, the Journal of Web Semantics, and the Journal of Universal Computer Science. So, Wolfgang, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, welcome again. I'm happy to be here. Who knows what this is talking about? Any idea? Who has a suggestion? Possibly, yeah. So in general, that's about the Arab Revolution, the Egypt instance. I'm not quite sure what exactly this message to say. First, because I cannot read all the Arabic sentences. But second, even if you look at this, you see it's very short, right? So you have a few messages which are 140 characters. This was a design decision. But actually you cannot say much in 140 characters, right? Still, it's interesting to look at these tweets because they represent something which represents, in a way, oral history now in a written form, right? So it's not the usual publications, it's not the usual longer descriptions and discussion, it's just chatting, it's discussing. So that's why in 2010 the Library of Congress made this agreement with Twitter to archive all the tweets, right? So starting 2006 until 2010, that was the first batch of data they got, and they got something like this, right? Now if you look at it, realizing that you don't really much understand it, you ask yourself, what else do you need, right? Maybe there's something missing, and indeed there's something missing. All these references point to external websites, right? And what people often do in these tweets is just discuss and comment and point to these websites, right? So even if you archive all the tweets, which the Library of Congress is now trying to do, it's not useful in a sense because it misses all the context. You have to, in addition, archive the websites as well, right? And there's been an interesting study last year at the Digital Library Conference where from a given body of tweets, the researchers investigated how many of these external websites, which are after all interesting websites, otherwise people would not have tweeted about them, are still available after 2 years. And they realized after 2 years, about 1/4 of these websites are already gone. They're not on the web anymore, they're not in any web archive anymore, right? And I went back to the Library of Congress website in 2013. There is one report, white paper, right after 3 years of this agreement, where they are stating it's clear that technology to allow for scholarship access and to access these large data sets is likely to be high technology for creating and distributing. So Twitter is very good in producing all this data. Actually, it's not Twitter, it's just redistributing it. Right? We are all, as collective crowd, producing this data. So this kind of works well. You can also store it. It's kind of stored somewhere in the vaults of the Library of Congress, but really accessing and using it is difficult, right? So they say the library is now, 3 years after, right, they started archiving this thing, pursuing partnerships to allow some limited access capability in reading rooms. That is not actually what you were thinking of when you heard first of this really nice initiative, right? I'm from Germany, so initially actually from Austria, but now I'm working in Germany. So the German National Library got a law in 2006 that they should also start archiving the web, or let's say web-based publications, whatever that is, right? So they have this law in 2006 to collect, enrich, catalog, and archive web publications. If you go to their website now, and I recently talked with them because we will be actually collaborating with them. If you go to the website, to the FAQ, it says, okay, right now we are not doing this, right? 7 years after this law, or 8 years after this law. There's a really nice initiative which is called the Internet Archive. They started very early to archive parts of the web. That's the Internet Archive in California, and we'll be visiting them in a few weeks. They have been archiving the web since 1996, and they have about 3 petabytes of data. Again, it's easy to store, so they have all the machinery and the disks and the computers, but it's possible to access this data through URL, which is kind of what you did in the first 1 or 2 years of the web, right? Somebody told you URL, you went there, and that's it, right? So there's lots of things to be done. So this all question is motivated to how can I kind of archive, but not only archive, but really actually use the past of the web. And we did a few projects in that context, which I don't want to list right now there on this slide. And we're starting actually with a new project, an ERC grant next year, which is called Alexandria, where we're actually focusing on this issue. And why I'm talking about this here is first because I was invited, but second because it is actually very closely related to the topic of this conference, because you can only make sense of this data if you use lots of human input, right? So there's a very specific task. You want to archive the web, and here we have the web, right, the different slides, snapshots of the web, so not just one snapshot as Google does, but really lots of them. If you want to make sense of it, you cannot just index it in a mechanistic way. You cannot just allow or support term-based queries. Actually, you want to have much more. You want to first include human input into your collection. These are the social networks and streams, so all what we get from Twitter and from these networks, that's actually very interesting input. And second, you want to take this input and make sense of it, right? So this is what is discussed in the context of linked open data, which is nothing more than a lot of human input in kind of easier to understand form, right? And using this to index the past of the web, and there are some more details which will keep me busy for the next 5 years, right? But using this human input, I think will hopefully be an important step forward in understanding the web and also the past of the web. Thank you.
So the second speaker of today will be Hervé, who's the director of the ICT Research Institute and also the professor at Permanent Fellow of the International Computer Science Institute at Berkeley. So his main areas of interest include statistical patterns classification applied to various ST domains. So, thank you. So we survived many talks already this morning. We survived coffee. So I'll try to, I will avoid statistics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so on. So I am mainly going to tell you about a story. I could have picked among three, so three real applications that we are developing now involving citizens at a very, very large scale. So that has been mentioned several times this morning, and it's never clear how to do it. So I'll have a couple of slides, because 5 minutes, it comes very quickly. A couple of slides showing you one case, and then I have a last slide, if I still have time, where I'll point you to two other application cases where we involve the same amount of people. Yeah, I will start for this story. I will start by assuming that you all know this game. This is a board game that is called the timeline. You know, you have cards where on one side you have an historical event, and on the other side you have the date when it happened. And people have to play with each other and guess the date of the event and so on that they see, and they have to reconstruct the timeline. So that's exactly our starting point. A real-life, physical game. And we are going to use that game basically to rebuild the digital memory of a whole country, Switzerland in our case. So this project actually is officially starting in 2015. So the kickstart will be 1st of January 2015. But we are working now on the infrastructure, preparing the cards, and setting up all the collaboration with people that I will tell you, which are all signed actually. So this project is only private funded, and it's only 1.5 million euros to start with during the first year, but this is going to bootstrap many, many more projects, as you will see. So actually we decided to bootstrap that project to celebrate the bicentenary anniversary of the state of Valais joining the Swiss Confederation. It's designed to be maintained for 20 years, so there is no point. Yeah. So the target is 2035. I will be retired by that time, but anyway. And this is we believe this is a typical large-scale social-IST projects, because these are the elements that we need. We need to have one common social goal that we all share among the whole country, building a digital memory of the country in this case. We have to involve the society at large, not only scientists, not only kids, but also elderly people and the regular people at home and so on and so on. We will do it. We need large-scale communication means. In our case, Migros, which is a huge supermarket chain in Switzerland, like Safeway or those kind of things in UK and US. They are giving us 500,000 basically, because it's going to help them while they help us. So they signed up with us. National supermarket chains, we are involving Swisscom shops where people can go and scan documents and so on that will be uploaded on our website. Media libraries, they have also signed up. Art schools, they are going to design the cards. But again, those cards are not going to live in the real world only. They are also going to live in a virtual world, of course. And of course, this is going to involve a lot of ICT research and development. Some of them are listed there. Just to show you that this is real, these are the cards that we are going to set up. So this is, we see some historical events. We are going to bootstrap the whole process with 200 cards that are going to be distributed starting 1st of January by Migros. Each time you go shopping there, you will get one card. That's also good for me, because in all cards, there will be the EDIAP logo, so they know about the projects and so on. There is no QR code, nothing. Anybody can, this is running already, anybody can scan any card and will be projected in a virtual space where you can get more information about that particular historical event. Again, we will bootstrap with 200 historical events synchronized with the National Media Library. So we picked 200 major historical events. And again, this is how the cards are going to look like. So when Napoleon crossed the Alps or whatever, the first time people flew across the Alps and so on and so on. Okay. So who are the partners? So we are here, we are building. So you can go there, you can already see the interface there. So www.valleydigital.ch. And so what are the partners? IDEAP, of course, providing all the technology. Right now we are working on the website. We have the art schools, so developing the cards.
So the cards are also going to be designed to be collector cards. So it's going to attract all the kids, all the people shopping at Migros and so on, and it's going to motivate them to scan the card and go on the website, and then they will be invited to introduce more information, of course. So they can go through the historical timeline, and then they will be invited to upload documents that they know about, that is not their private documents, old pictures. Yeah, all people don't know how to scan documents. So we also have a deal with the Swisscom shop. So any people in Switzerland can go with an old picture that they have in their lying in their house somewhere and get the document scanned and uploaded to that particular website for free. So this is sponsored by Swisscom. So we believe that all those documents are going to be uploaded. Then on the ICT side, we are going to build, enrich the timeline, process the documents, audio documents, video documents, text documents, synchronize all of them, align them over time, and so on and so on. Then we have people working on story building, so an old AI kind of discipline. So this is all going on. So Migros has signed up. So this is, again, a shopping supermarket store chain. So we have banks, Swisscom, Swiss private partnership, state partnership, so the National Media Library is signed up, and that's actually a way to bootstrap the virtual world. So on the real world, we'll have the card. On the virtual world, we'll have the media library that is going to be moved, that is being moved now as I speak, to that website, and we promise them in return to return their own library enriched within the next 3 years. So yeah, the state of Valais and so on and so on. Crowdsourcing, of course, so people can enter any input to the, if you believe that your birthday is an historical event to the Swiss history, it's up to you to upload it there. Then it's going to be pruned automatically through our ICT processing and semantic interpretation, making sure that events are properly linked with each other, that they make sense, and so on, and that some documents are not some simple crazy outsiders there. Okay, so apparently I have more time. So one minute left. So this is just one example of something that is actually running. If you like others, I like to really advertise too, but maybe I can spend some time just on the second one. Please go there. So this is something that is becoming famous. It has been part of grand challenges of the last 5 IEEE major conferences over the last year. So over the last 12 months, we have collected with Nokia, before they became something else, but before we knew that they were going to be bought by Microsoft, so we had the right basically to transfer all the data that was collected by us and Nokia to EDIAP, so the data is owned by us. So for 1 year, we had a lot of fun by distributing about 200 cell phones for free at the condition that people agreed to have all their phone logs recorded, GPS positioning logs, proximity logs, so who are you next to and so on, who are you talking to, and also all your multimedia logs. This is about 80 gigabytes of data. I'm not sure this is okay for what is people call big data that I haven't seen yet, but we believe this is a real big data. It's really a huge data, and there are all kinds of competitions. The simplest one that we invite you to try, since we are talking a lot about also modeling people's behavior, is basically you see all people, behaviors of all those people that are anonymized, of course, over the last year. But let's suppose that we hide we hide the last 2 months. You know, how to predict what's going to be the next step of a particular person knowing the history over the last 8 months, something like that. I will stop here. Yeah. Thank you for your attention.
So the next speaker is going to be Zambonelli, who is full professor in computer science at the University of Modena, Virginia. And he actually has been one of the early pioneers in that area of social collective intelligence. And his main areas of expertise covers pervasive and autonomic computing in large-scale agent systems. So,
thank you very much. What I recently got interested in my research activities is understanding how the evolution of technology could change our urban life, our way of living in our urban environment. And I got into this idea of urban superorganism. In biology, we talk about superorganism when there is a colony of animals, of individual organisms, that is able to behave in a globally coordinated way as if it were a single individual organism, a superorganism. How can a colony, a multitude of seemingly stupid individuals, be able to behave in a seemingly intelligent way when they are able to share their sensing, they are able to share their understanding of what happens around, and when they are able to act in a coordinated, in a globally coordinated way. And this is exactly what, for instance, ants are capable of doing. By sharing the sensing of pheromones spread in an environment, by collectively compute the information contained in this pheromones trail to produce new information, new pheromone trails, and to adopt this computed, processed pheromones information to act in a globally coordinated way. And the fact that they are able to act together is what let us perceive their collective intelligence. Otherwise, we had no possibility of interviewing ants. Hey, what do you think? Are you intelligent? So, acting is a fundamental properties of collective intelligence. So, will we be able to turn our urban environments, to turn our way of living in our environments into a way of living in a superorganism? I think yes, of course, because we do have sensing, understanding, computing, and acting capabilities. And we as humans have it, and we can be complemented in this by ICT devices. So there are things that we can do as humans that ICT devices can't, and vice versa. ICT devices can sense physical phenomena. We humans can sense social, emotional phenomena. ICT devices can process simple patterns of physical and social activities. We can process emotion. We can process empathic emotion. ICT devices can act in our environment. Traffic lights, digital signatures, or in the future, robots. We humans can act in our social environment, for instance, by means of social persuasion, which no machine will ever have. So there are these sensing, computing, and acting capabilities in these urban environments that, if tied together, brought to work together, and we have the coordination and the communication infrastructure to do that, can indeed lead to what will be a superorganism behavior. That is, the capability of the individuals, devices and humans, as a whole, to behave in a globally coordinated way towards some global finalized behavior that, in my hope, will be able to dramatically change the way we live in our urban environment, and when there will be density enough, even in our rural environment, why not? So it's not simply one application area. It's really a change of the way we live together, and we will be able to think, sense, perceive, and act all together, we and our ICT companions. But what I see in the research and in the visions around is too much focus on the sensing, collecting data, and analyzing this data. But this will never be a superorganism unless we close the loop by action, the collective action part of the picture. Only by acting all together, by coordinating our action and our way of thinking, we will be able to really have such a vision of superorganisms be realized. With all the technical, social, legal challenges that these will introduce. From a viewpoint as a computer scientist and as a software engineer, I tend to see only those that are technical challenges related to how to represent the urban situation and the urban behavior that we want to achieve in urban environment. And how can we turn this representation into some actual global collective behavior? And how can we actually convince, turn people to behave as desired, to behave in a way that will lead to some global, supra-level, supra-individual objective and goal? And how this will possibly relate to the evolution of social networking as we know it today. So will this idea of a superorganism contrast the goals and objective of the big social player today? More specifically, what I do now in my research is trying to understand what programming abstraction, what software infrastructures, what actually software aids and software component we have to realize, we have to coordinate to realize an infrastructure that will somehow make all of this possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Franco. So, the last speech of today is going to be given by Magnus Boman, who is a professor in intelligent software systems at the ETH. He's also a senior expert researcher at SICS, where he works with massive data analytics. In recent years, he has worked in computational epidemiology in Stockholm and Abu Dhabi, the latter as research fellow at the Etisalat Geek Innovation Center. In addition, Boman leads the innovation radar for the European Institute for Innovation and Economics.
Thanks very much. Big data. My point is we're doing the wrong thing right now. We're focusing on macro, just as we've been doing for many years in machine learning and now in deep learning. And we don't have to. So my simple point is we can move from macro to micro, and we should. So one possible definition of big data is just what you see up there. It's data impossible to analyze directly due to its size. It's just too big. But a lot of what we refer to as big data, we heard several examples today as telecoms data, call data, that sort of thing, is about people. And you know the definition of an individual as something indivisible, the smallest unit of interest, the sort of core, the vertices of any graph we're doing. So it's not about populations, it's not about macro, it is about micro. And it's not about statistics, it's about people. So how do we go from micro data to micro use? Well, there's a simple proposal that you could use big data not just for macro, that is for society, but for individual use, that is for us. And to me, many of the things we've been talking about today in social collective intelligence, both in here and during the breaks, has been about what is my connection, my social life to that of society. Well, I know for me personally, my life is my micro. So I can now tell my wife live, I love you, because this is broadcast and she's watching this. That's my micro, right? And my goal, my micro, is my individual use, and that was an example of a customization of a service. I turned this camera in the other direction for a few seconds. Now, in order to come up with a scientific way of doing this, the methods, we need to do computational approaches for what I think is social collective intelligence anyway. So here's a map of the UK. If you were to zoom in on London on this particular map, you would see the call network, who's calling who in the United Kingdom. And you would see that there were very few calls crossing the River Thames, which is strange because it's a sort of a map which is about people behavior, and it's not a physical map. I mean, the Thames is a physical divider. Why don't we call across it? So this is not my work, but I came across it when I was doing epidemiology studies in Abu Dhabi, as was mentioned in the introduction. And I found it fascinating that somehow in order to understand a map like this, we need more than one discipline. We certainly need a lot more than computer science or just graph theory. So, what do? Well, I think we have to know who we are. We have to know our population, as has been stressed a couple of times already. And in my own work, the goal is really simple. It's about maximizing health and well-being for every individual, not just for a population. So that means diminishing the impact of communicable disease, for instance, because communicable disease often has terrible implications for the individual, and these terrible implications propagate. They create rings on the water, and this is what forms a wave in our society today. This particular picture is from kiva.org, which is a microloan institute. So those are all individuals that have taken microloans in one particular region in this world. So again, my point is only that why do what science has done too often and what engineering has done too often once again? Why make the same mistake again? Why go from micro to macro when we don't have to? Because we want to talk about individuals, that micro. We have micro data, and we have the computational power to stay in micro. So let's do micro. Thank you.
Thank you, Magnus. So, I think there is now space for questions. So, let's
about the macro divide. You made the example of communicable disease, right? That's one of the examples where actually you cannot avoid having a global approach. If you want to protect yourself and the individual in your microsphere, you vaccinate the population. You go for an effect of herd immunity. So you take a global view. So sometimes the connectivity really enforces a global view if you want to protect the individual. And you cannot really think in micro terms alone. So I wonder how you reconcile this.
Well, I think that's a great question. Policy making, as was stressed in several talks this morning, is very difficult to do, just waving your arms. And politicians, as you know, they like concrete examples. They like to know what happens to this family in a particular scenario and so on. So a lot of it is simulations and understanding future epidemics. And because we don't know what a future pandemic, for instance, would look like, we have to do some sort of simulation or at least a thought experiment. But at the same time, the scientific methods we have are, for instance, SIR and compartmental models, which are really simple models based on differential equations. And they are treating people in these models as if we were sheep. You are now in this category, you are infected, and now you are recovered, and so on. But if you go to an individual doctor and you talk to an epidemiologist about what do you think about this Brussels 2030 scenario where this thing is unleashed upon the population, then they would say something typically like, well, I think we should go back to Sarajevo 1975 in order to understand that. Which is how they work. It's evidence-based reasoning, it's empirical reasoning, grounded in facts. And I'm being interested in modeling and know a few things about computer science, I would say, but Sarajevo 1975 is not a comparable society to Brussels 2030. And even I'm a futurologist for the European Union. I don't know what the Brussels 2030 city will look like. And neither do you. I mean, you are the experts and you don't know. So there's this gap. And I'm thinking that big data, cleverness, intelligence, especially the social side of it, can assist this epidemiologist. So he or she can be a modern Sherlock Holmes thanks to us. That's my goal, actually.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a question for the first two speakers. So the approach to archive data and preserve all information is also can be in conflict with the right to be forgotten and data minimization. So what would you say about that, or how can you address this conflict?
Good question, too. So actually we do have a project which is called Forgetting, which is also about forgetting, and also not just because of privacy reasons, but also because human mind also works by forgetting and generalizing things, right? So, and therefore I think also in the Alexandria project, we do have obviously privacy policies in place. And one important issue, and here maybe I disagree a little bit with the last speaker, is that we will do a lot of aggregation, right? Because if you go down to the personal level, you speak about personal data, you cited the appropriate directives very nicely. I think for certain people or persons, it might be allowed to talk about them in details, like our politicians nowadays, they have no private life anymore. But in general, I think you should, and maybe you actually also will be more interested in a general interpretation of how things went, how the Arab Revolution actually came into being and how it developed without knowing and maybe also not caring about very specific lifelines, maybe just as some examples if you then ask them, but otherwise you are interested in the big picture.
I'm not sure I want to add something. In our case, I don't think there is much problem. People are just on a voluntary basis bringing information, and all documents that they have at home and so on. And then for all the privacy issues, we just stick to the rules currently used by the media libraries, national libraries, where they collect all documents they can and they have their own rules. And we are just going to follow those rules. The only thing we are going to care about is that once a year, Migros, the famous supermarket store, is going to release new cards, basically, into game to keep people motivated and so on. In that case, only that case, we will check if someone is personally concerned about one card, if he doesn't want to have his face appearing on a card and so on, distributed in supermarket stores, we will check that. But in all other cases, these are like public documents. This is considered as public documents. Even by the providers, they agree that those documents are used for private uses. But there are plenty of great old pictures, of farmers, let's say, or historical documents lying in the basement of private houses everywhere in the world. And basically we want to unearth those documents by motivating the people at large to bring them to the media library.
Just to add, but the documents or pictures could also concern information about others, not about the person who uploads it. It could be a picture where other people are also on the picture that maybe don't know about it.
Yes, then I should check with the media library what they do about that. That's a good point. Yeah.
My question, or first my remark is there not a contradiction between the first three speakers that talk and dream? I mean, it's a remark of a simple economist, not an ICT man even. Is there not a contradiction between the three first speakers who dream about big data and assembling huge data? When I see in Switzerland what you are going to do, I mean, you will have not terabytes, but something much, much, much higher. on the one hand. On the other hand, I see Mr. Boman speaking about microdata, because that has then my question to him. Don't you believe in the Watson of IBM that comes from unstructured data to structured data, and then specifically in my side to structured medical data, that will give the feedback and the data for the Watson to make the perfect diagnosis from the medical side, medical point of view, for instance. So I see a tremendous contradiction between the three first speakers and the last one. So how do you solve that and explain that to my simple economical mind?
I see the same contradiction. I cannot wait for Martin's vision to come true. That is, the simple answer to an economist is that I'm waiting for the day when there are 50 million Watsons assisting me and epidemiologists to combat infectious and communicable disease.
They are working on micro Watsons.
If I may add something to that, because I'm also concerned about that and I'm interested in that. I don't think I ever mentioned macro data and micro and micro data and so on. I think there is just also a continuum between the two, and it really depends what you want to do with the data. You know, so in the data that I just tried to advertise at the end, which is really there, and to my knowledge is one of the biggest data ever collected in that area of telecommunication, really. Challenge me on that one. We can go to micro data, but then even, although the data is anonymized, but if you can see where the person, every person is spending the night during the weekdays, it's kind of easy to infer who it is, right? Because you know basically where the person lives. So there, even if the data is completely anonymous, you can basically infer a lot about private information. Macro data may also be useful. Then you don't have privacy concerns anymore. You look at a microscopic level, and then you can infer mass behavior and so on, which is also very important for criminal activities and so on, and many problems. But sometimes there is a solution in between. And I think that's the most interesting one, where we want to model behavioral patterns of certain types of people. So and then in that case, it's called aggregation of micro data. So if you start, and then we just have to define the level of aggregation. You know, if you start aggregating 10 people, the behavior of 10 people in my database that I advertised, suddenly it is anonymous. You cannot guess who it is. You know that it's among a group of 10 people that you don't even know who it is. Or you can aggregate 100 people. Or if you aggregate a whole country, then you get back to macro data. So I think it really depends what you want to do with it. But sometimes for security reason, you may want to go down to the micro data of one individual behavior. But then there are institutions in Europe, and here I'm thinking of Interpol, which is very famous. They are the guardian of privacy in Europe, privacy information in Europe. Sorry.
Just a reply then, or a comment before you come in. I strongly disagree that there is a continuum between micro and macro. There is something in between, and that's the meso level. That is the family or the small company or everyone belonging to the Social-IST or Socialist project. About privacy, I think it's a very... A friend of mine who is an epidemiologist, he was given the question, when do you know that a serious pandemic is at large? He said, it's when your neighbor's son dies. That's when it starts. So that's micro. Now, if you are in that situation, you don't care about privacy anymore. You just want to be safe. And there is no spectrum at all. You just give up on it because there is added value that you can get from the ICT. And then you pick that up, just as you would pick up a medicine that would save your life or your family's lives. So I think that if you aggregate the electronic health records, or digital health records of 10 patients, one of them, all of them, will have free text fields, and in those free text fields, the GP will have written something like, the cell phone number of the patient's mother is, and it will be there. And there is no way of getting rid of it. We cannot wash it away. We cannot just say that we're safe through aggregation. It's either macro or micro, to me.
Hello, my question is addressed to Mr. Zambonelli. The superorganisms that you mentioned, isn't it the same with the swarm intelligence, which is already a very well researched field within management? And if not, what's the difference?
Yes, swarm intelligence is well researched in biology as well as in economics and business and in computer science. But we have to face now the spread of mobile devices, embedded sensors, the spread of social networks. So this will really make it possible to apply swarm intelligence lessons to our urban environment and recreate that, not simply imitate that, but found a new swarm intelligence method that can apply for the good to our society.
Okay, so this is, if I understand well, this is practically taking to scale the existing theory.
Yes, that's my vision.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have time for last one.
Yes, I wanted to comment exactly along the same lines to the superorganism. It was said that in biosystems, species would exhibit kind of a collective sensing behavior. Could also be that's an individual sensing behavior plus sharing. And then there is a processing and motivating a trigger or an action, as you say. I think that particularly what you suggest with the biosystems that you show in picture here is that these biosystems have a very tight coupling between perception and then the action. These are couplings like nutrition cycles or energy flows or finding food, for example. I would doubt that for human societies, this coupling is as strong so that we can apply the same cycle of sensing, collectively sensing or sharing, and then perceiving, and then coming to a decision on how to act. And that act again be something that is a globally coordinated action, as you say, for the biosystems. I would identify very different modes of coupling between sensing and perception and action in between animal systems, biosystems, and human society, just because the human rationale is not predictable in that sense that you can say what the action will be if a person perceives a certain stimulus. Would you agree to that?
Well, it is true that in ants and in general in natural swarm intelligence behavior, the feedback loop between sensing, understanding, and acting is very close, very, very tight, which may not be the case for human behaviors. So we have to rethink this feedback loop of sensing, acting, understanding to adapt it to human behavior and complex human behaviors. Nevertheless, there are cases in which indeed we have an ant behavior, a very close feedback loop. Let's say when we drive. When we drive, we are very instinctive in sensing the traffic situation and deciding very soon where to turn, whether to go on the left or on the right. This is a very close loop of sensing, understanding, and acting, which lead to emergent behavior in traffic situation. Emergent behavior which are often for the bad. Why? Because we don't have the capability of collectively sharing traffic information, and we don't have the capability of collectively acting for the good. We only act opportunistically and egoistically. If our traffic were a superorganism, it would collectively sense and collectively decide for the good of the individuals as well as for the good of the traffic situation in our town as a whole.
So one very last question, since we are running out of time. So please, Stewart.
My question is for Hervé. Yeah. In your situation, the data is being mapped onto a structure which is somehow already socialized because history has already been made. So there's an issue between the global and the local. Yeah, because in some sense, the history globalizes the information. It gives the global structure. Do you think people could make history if you talked about doing this with contemporary information? Because of course, one of the serious differences between micro and at the micro level is actually locality, whether something is global or local. And I think this is a very interesting issue because in a way, history has already been made from the social process of deciding what history is. And people orient to that and that structures their thought in some way. And the question is whether you think there are systems which could actually help construct that structure.
That's a tough one. I don't know. Really, I don't know. I think we want to just provide a nice tool for people. No, it's a real bridge between the real world and virtual world to motivate people to build this kind of history. Now, whether we can go ahead beyond that, and you are talking about predicting the history, or what?
I'm thinking about. Sorry, I'm thinking about contemporary data.
Yeah, but it's like any books, on history. It's going to lack feedback, or it's going to lack delay between, and I think, it's better to write history 50 years or 100 years later. Yeah. So I think it's going to be the same problem with computers than for human beings anyway. So the latest, the history is going to be less precise than the late one, the old one, yeah. Probably.
But somehow those structures are important for being able to move data from one context to the other because there's a shared structure for interpretation.
So that's a research issue there.
Yeah.
So let me add one comment on that, right? So I think what you have in all these collections in the past, but also for contemporary collections, is the same kind of structure where you have entities, events, which structure what you have. And of course you have a difference between and locations, right? But you have a difference between situations in the past, right? Because you have more coarse-grained, you have more generalized view. But in general, the kind of structuring and the way you structure is related, right? Except that you have it on a very much more fine-grained level. If you talk about current history, right, then we care about tiny about a micro level, right? Then we care about tiny differences in location or in time, and when we look back 1,000 years, then 1 year is nothing, right?
But we have social structures which make this happen for history. So, for example, in the UK, you have the 30-year rule where government papers will not be available for 30 years, and so there's a forcing of this kind of structuring into coarse-grained events, and so this is easier to share in some way. Whereas a contemporary, you're lost in a morass of detailed events, and I think they're qualitatively different.
It's true. Still, and that's why kind of using this Twitter data in the Library of Congress is totally really hard. Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to thank you, the speakers, for their very interesting and inspiring contributions.
Okay, so is that okay? Yeah, we're going to move on now and look at the interdisciplinary context, because part of the social-IST agenda is this transdisciplinary factor. And we're going to begin with Marina, Marina Jirotka, who's going to talk about responsible research and innovation in social collective intelligence. So Marina, and speak
to the microphone. Okay. Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. Yes, I'm not Stewart Anderson. I am Marina Jirotka. So partly my interest in this area of responsible research and innovation came from the practical experiences I had in my research of designing applications and infrastructures for a setting that has been characterized as social collective intelligence. Roughly, this was supporting scientific collaborations, developing the next generation of infrastructure for scientists, known as e-science or cyber infrastructure. And in that setting, some of the very serious challenges of both developing and naturalizing or embedding that infrastructure have not been technical, but they've been ethical, institutional, and legal. And so for me, that sort of area became both a topic of resource. It became a resource for me to do my work, but it also became a topic of research. And then simultaneously, the landscape, the context in which I was doing this research, that we're all doing this research in, is changing. And currently researchers now who are getting public money for doing ICT research are under increasing pressure from funders and from citizens to have greater accountability for the work that they do. There's a kind of growing concern or a growing awareness that we're increasingly developing quite powerful technologies that do have the ability in some senses to reshape our lives and our social world. Coupled with this, there's also an increased presence of new media and research communications that really increase the speed at which we can react to situations. So the rhythm of ICT is now such that applications we develop today can go viral tomorrow and have certain consequences, intended or unintended, that we may not be able to control. Such technologies are now pervasive in society. So, what do I need to do now? No, that way. That way. Okay. So in response to these, we're actually seeing new initiatives such as responsible research and innovation. I'm not going to read these quotes out, but these are kind of definitions for you to look at. This is a kind of broad program of research where people are looking into new forms of governance, not only for ICT, although that's a very big one, but for many areas of science, such as nanotechnology, synthetic biology. And these initiatives are being researched, for example, by the funding bodies in the UK, EPSRC, TSB, BBSRC, but also in the EU, where they're going to form part of a cross-cutting theme for Horizon 2020. And if you want to know more about that, we happen to have Karen Fabry, who's the policy officer for the Responsible Research and Innovation program of work. So that's really nice. So I don't want to rain on the parade, but what I'm going to do is just briefly mention one example of a kind of bundle of ethical issues that I think illustrate quite nicely the things that might come out of social collective intelligence. And from that, I'm going to conclude with some potential ways of addressing these concerns and what the implications for governance might be. Because this is going to happen, it's moving forward, there will be a governance in terms of the ways in which we do our research. And it's related to the rhythm of ICT and the ways in which we're developing these systems. So I was going to give you an example from my own work and from e-science, but then I got dazzled by this, and I think it's actually quite important. It's a recent piece of a proposal, a report that came from the World Economic Forum, and I think it's a really interesting one for us to attend to. So it's always been the case that it's hard to predict the ways that new technologies are going to shape society. But as I said before, the scale and the speed of information created and the transfer, the ways it is being transferred in today's connected society is really unprecedented historically. Facebook's reached more than 1 billion active users in less than a decade. Twitter's attracted over 500 million active users in 7 years. Sina Weibo, China's dominant microblogging platform, has passed 400 million active accounts in summer 2012. And I think we are all aware of the fact that while social media has lots of transformative effects, studies of Twitter and Facebook activity in Egypt and Tunisia leave no doubt about the role social media played in facilitating the Arab Spring. So some individuals and organizations have suffered losses because of this. Now, these cases have been called digital wildfires, and the World Economic Forum indicate two situations where wildfires are most dangerous. Where there's high situations of high tension, when the false information or inaccurately presented imagery can cause damage before it's possible to actually change it. It's like shouting fire and everybody starts running to the door, but before you can say it's an error. Others are where actually the information that's circulated is in this bubble of like-minded people, and then they're reluctant to change it because it's a sort of trusted network. So things like Facebook, where people don't want to change the information that might be incorrect. So what are the consequences here, either intended or unintended, for these innovations? And who has responsibility to address these issues? Are we just going to let them happen? Or do we actually want to try to do something about them? And particularly in a global era or in a digital universe. The World Economic Forum is currently considering these questions, and we might draw some ideas from the things and the deliberations that they're looking through. But I'm going to jump to away from what they were doing to what it means for us. So here we want to think much more about shaping culture and governance. Lots of people are thinking about how to do this, making laws, making initiatives, doing standards and so forth. But I think for us, the newsworthiness of people getting into trouble through their actions in social media is actually part of the process of improving our collective sensitivity to the sorts of traps and pitfalls that social media holds for the unwary, for people who aren't sure of what they're doing. Governance, therefore, seems to be a case of fine-tuning that across a whole range of socially embedded regulatory processes. It could be embedded in the technology. It could be embedded in the systems. It might have to do with establishing and reinforcing social norms of behavior and codes of conduct. It could be maybe amendments to legislation. So governance isn't something that just happens. It actually, not in just one place, it occurs in many different places and across a range of technologies. So I just want to skip to one last bit. The analogy might be this concept of privacy by design. There could actually be the concept of governance by design. And as with privacy, which has privacy-enhancing technologies, there might be a toolkit of governance, this kind of mechanisms that work together with an understanding of the sorts of situations in which they might work well. It's really important none of these things are static. As people participate and learn, the systems themselves morph, the external circumstances change, and so governance also needs to change to develop new capabilities and new implications. And that's all I want to say. Sorry.
Okay, so I think we'll try and take all the talks and then take questions at the end. So now we have Chris Speed, who is a designer, and as we know, the digital agenda recommends that we interact with designers at all times.
Does it? Oh, good.
Yeah. And he's going to talk about design.
Oops, how easy. If it appears. Okay. Yeah, so I am a designer. There's one in every room somewhere. It's like rats. You're not too far from rats or designers somewhere. I moved in, I did fine art and moved into a position of chair in design informatics. So I work very closely with the School of Informatics at Edinburgh. But particularly starting to develop a space such as social experience design, which is informed by our experience as it emerges of data and how collective intelligence might emerge. This is a 22-year-old architect discovering for the first time what her iPhone has gathered in 10 days. There's 800 pages there of 10-point aerial, and it was quite an epiphany. While you talk about data as though it's just like carbon dioxide or something around, it's very tricky to deal with, and it is the responsibility for designers to somehow offer some kind of fabric, some materialization, to allow us to start carving, designing it, and working with it as though it was all the other materials that we're very, very good at. Now, understanding what this means is really challenging, because moving from a continuum, I'm just acutely aware, following the last presentation, that actually any continuum between big and small probably does collapse. It's a very anthropocentric thing, I think, and I might have fallen into that trap. But the idea of the individual and the crowd, but designers have always been working with things. And the chances are, over the next 20, 15, even 5 years, things are going to be connected and they're going to start doing things. The data they're all going to collect And what's interesting as we begin to look at these type of pictures is that the non-human isn't just the AI. The non-human really is everything out there, including the two cats that sit at home and jump on my bed at night, through to the plants and things that constitute my back garden. So there's a very, very large space which is opening up for designers, but I suspect that all of us are going to have to inhabit. A couple of projects just to suggest where this is going and where it might be a problem is that we developed a technology a few years ago called Tales of Things, which allowed people to tell stories onto physical artifacts. And it was sold on to, or given away actually to Oxfam. And Oxfam, people like Annie Lennox have been using it.
Unique dress, which I actually wore to a rather splendid occasion, which happened to be Nelson Mandela's 90th birthday party at Hyde Park in London. So if you buy this...
So the illustration of that is this idea that there is material artifacts now, and we're understanding that we see in the UK, the BBC introduced this data shadow, the idea that data was behind me. But you know that just isn't the case. I'm sorry. Increasingly, data is ahead of us, or it accompanies the object simultaneously. So it's going to get very, very hard to talk about what that type of thing might be. As we've discovered, and as we've worked through our work, is that as this data then starts to coalesce and correlate with other data stacks, if you like, you're going to find machine learning and AIs begin to develop types of emergent, type of properties, in which it may well be the case that instead of asking me an object, a human to tell an object to restore, to retain a memory, that the objects may well have their own position to stay. And this is something designers are interested in. If I'm just the sole designer and then the collective of the designer, what happens when the objects start designing back? Because they're the things that are put away in cupboards with other things that could perhaps correlate data. So we do have this perennial question of what is the first thing that something is going to say to you if we assume it's going to happen in the next 5 years? Is it that objects, this is work for the Royal Geographical Society looking at flow. This woman's just been alerted that a tennis ball wants picking up and wants moving on the tennis ball's behalf. She doesn't know what it's good for. She doesn't know where it wants to go. But increasingly, we may well find that we're moving things on behalf of things. We might not know where we're going or what they're doing, but we might be a little bit subservient to those other things. A good example was in this last year, we actually loaded a load of porridge oats with just some serial stories. And by, excuse the pun, the serial stories is that when you scan the barcode for the first time, you get, hey, pick me up. Second time you scan it, it says, oh, thanks for picking me up, please move me. And in this context, people were scanning. And what was astonishing as an artist is that if you scan a benign object, you'll do what you're told. You have no problem. You don't seem to have any threat whatsoever. And all these people work collectively with the things to then constitute new objects. In this case, it was a tower. So we have this very challenging perspective. As we've mentioned, shoes gaining intelligence. If the shoes can talk to the floor and the shoes will probably develop different perspectives. So, when you're thinking about collective intelligence, the social is only one part of a huge non-human spectrum. And be very aware, as we start feeding artifacts, some of them might start biting. Thanks very much.
Okay, so Amir, yeah? So Amir is going to talk about the Crowd Wisdom Accelerator. Yeah, so he's from European Alliance for Innovation in Belgium.
Yes, Crowd Wisdom Accelerator. Okay, welcome. Before I start, can I invite you to shake the hand of the person beside you and to introduce yourself, please. Thank you very much. This is related very much to the virtual marketplace, which I'm going to introduce to you in the next 5 minutes. I want to take you back 16 years ago. It was October 97. I was standing in London Bridge, looking down, totally with despair, looking down the Thames River. My business there, my startup wasn't going nowhere. It was so difficult to really approach people as foreigner in London, to get new clients, to find investors, to approach strategic partners. And I just had this thought in my mind, what will happen if we could have this place that you can really engage innovation, you can speak to mentor, you can get to strategic partners globally, you can raise money, you can get researchers. What I'm going to introduce today is the virtual accelerator. The pain, 98% of innovators work alone. Weak ecosystems to support fast business growth, and local economies that are really striving and looking for new growth engines. So imagine a place, a community and web-based platform with 10,000 new ideas every month, 1 million innovators, startups, research, academy, work together, communicate and cooperate in one place. A crowd wisdom accelerator. To give you an example, if I have a startup company now in Israel that is doing a specific parking platform application, and it's looking to produce a new technology. Instead of doing that, maybe this technology already exists within Oxford University, within one of the research of Hervé. If I could just know that this technology is already there, this could save a lot of time and money. Now, this crowd wisdom platform basically will provide partnering and matching, so you can partner with anybody globally. You have a community which will give you feedback straight away on your product. Instead of developing and then seeing how the market will react, you can immediately speak to your clients. You can get ranking. You can get ranks for the technology from your clients. You can get access to funding, to private investors, and to crowdfunding. I don't know if you know, but in Italy these days, there is a new law which enables to raise up to €5 million through crowdfunding. Imagine if you have a community of innovators that supports you. Mentors at the moment on the platform of this initiative that is led by the EAI, which is the European Alliance for Innovation. So we already have 300 mentors within the platform. And the acceleration program. The acceleration program, instead of having on like a local accelerator when you can have up to 15, 20 ventures, here you can put up to hundreds of ventures, projects together with mentors and support them through the process. The EAI community provides 60,000 innovators, 200 institutional members already, and international mentors from different countries. On the break, I had a quick chat with Marina, and she said to me and I liked it very much, she said, as an expert, I'm not sure how innovation happens. And I fully agree with this, and I would say that a platform like this, and a virtual platform like this, perhaps can be a good start. Thank you.
Tell us about real-world challenges of innovation in social collective intelligence for social inclusion. That's a long title.
Yes. So I'm normally at the University of Edinburgh. At the moment, I'm with the JRC. So one colleague here. So I'm going to give quite a JRC type presentation, no videos, no inspiration, just things that we have found and that we think that are important for frontline policy. And we work with policymakers, particularly in the field of social inclusion, and they don't really like to hear too much about technology. And they need certain things, and we see certain things about the way information technology is introduced into the field of social inclusion that raises a lot of problems. So I'm going to point out some things that we've seen at kind of the front line that we think needs addressed already in research. How does this work? Okay, so the JRC is it's the largest part of the Commission, internal research centre, and we do really to advise policy, not have wild ideas like you guys can do very nicely. And we follow these types of concerns, some of the most important of the 5 leading policy concerns in Europe in the current Commission. 3 of them are in the area of social inclusion, relating to employment, education, and social inclusion. How to meet these targets of reducing social exclusion, improving educational levels. And these things are reflected in the Horizon 2020 societal challenges, the health and demographic change, well-being, and inclusive, innovative society. So what are the characteristics of this field of social inclusion? There's a lot of people at risk. At risk, we mean they are suffering one of the things. They are either unemployed, they have a chronic illness, they have low skills. Many people, nearly a quarter of the population are at risk. So this is a really major challenge. High levels of public sector involvement in this area. It's not freewheeling business. It's not where consumer choice rules. And these are very vulnerable people in many cases. Then they're people whose lives are difficult, who are expensive for the state to support. They're results of other sorts of failing systems. They're not always your ideal user of the new IT system either. When you try and develop new technologies to support activities in the field of social inclusion, you have to recognize there's a particular kind of qualities of this regime. It varies very differently according to where you are in Europe. Really very differently. The assumptions about your own country just will not hold true in another country. Public spending decisions are key in anything that happens in this field. You have issues like a lot of tensions between the public sector and the private sector. So when you're thinking about innovation, who's taking this forward? Is it the public sector or the private sector? Most of services and any thinking about social inclusion services happens at a regional or local level, which makes it in tension with some of these services we hear today, which are about globalization, about the whole country. A lot of these are down to decisions, actions taken at a very local level, with local funding decisions, local practices, very local conditions. And this makes it actually very difficult to have diffusion, to have common solutions that will apply everywhere, which is the sort of nice sort of thing we want to do with online technology, is reach a lot of people. This makes it very difficult. But also creates the conditions of experimentation, because you have a lot of little closed environments in which you can experiment to do something new. We have a lot of different sorts of people there. They're not just users of the system. When we look at how new ICT systems are developed in this field for social inclusion, there's a lot of very innovative ideas coming from anybody. Okay, so how do I think social collective intelligence fits in? First, I see it as an evolution of Web 2, a close integration of human practices with computation. And we have this risk, the balancing of not having human beings turning elements of a computer system, which I think some of these things I hear today, very much people are not using these as the tools, but elements in a computer system. So we've discovered a number of things from projects on digital games and social inclusion, from projects on ICTs for social care, and now I'm doing work on employment and crowdfunding and time banks and all this sort of area. And first thing we want to say, ask you, if you're doing work in this field, to focus on services that empower people, and not about the system, making the system better, but empowering individual people, people at risk, the community and family around them, and the professionals, and help them help each other. So this is a focus on the people rather than the system. And then I noticed we see 5 challenges, 5 things in the technologies that are coming into the field of social inclusion, which is 5 reasons why they fail at the point of kind of implementation, and that we think have to be addressed in the research process. One is involve a lot of different users. And everyone says involve the users. The trouble is we see the wrong users being involved. You think, well, this came from social care. 80% of social care is delivered by family members. Almost none of the AAL projects on the social care even recognize that family carers were important. And they provide 80% of all the care. So if the users you're thinking about are the wrong ones, then you have to go back to the drawing board again. So in all of this, think of all the users, work with them. Focus on real-world experimentation, because often you never know where the actual thing that's going to work is going to come out. You wait until the end of the research project. Actually, something you found on the first day was the important thing. Another really important issue is you must have impact assessment methodologies. You must be able to go and say, this is how it really helps people. And a lot of the projects say, oh, this is really good, it changes the game, we can't really tell how it works. No, that's not good enough. If you really want to get some sort of impact, you have to really understand how you're making a difference to people's lives with this type of system. And you have to think about how do we measure that? How do we show that? And if it's complex, if it's changing the rules of the game, well, that's even harder. You have to work on how will this be taken from research into practice. What are the pathways? Is it going to go through entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs, who go around every single local authority in Europe trying to sell their technology? Or is it something that's going to be put in through a global giant like Google? There's very different pathways. And you need to think about that because it affects the shape of the technology and how you take it from research into implementation. And thirdly, the technology is only one part of it. We need the skills to go at the same time. Too often, we saw with a lot of the digital game stuff, great digital games developed in the university labs, but there's nobody out there who knows how to use it. And knows how to adapt it and knows how to take it to the next level. So you need to do, even at the research stage, thinking about the skills and how those skills are going to be developed, how you're going to teach them, who's going to learn them in different ways, and then send them outside. So these are things that you need to say in research policy. Any research project has to have these type of elements, but also these aren't things that you just do. They're very difficult scientific challenges in themselves. How to do any of these things, you also need work on that. We don't know how to identify multiple user groups very easily. It's not an easy thing. Otherwise, we'd all be doing it. So you still, all of these things need, they are research topics in themselves. So what I'm saying is, often these things are left until the end of the in the implementation stage. Now we need to take them back into the research stage to be aware of them because they improve the quality of the research. They are scientific difficulties, kind of challenges that will, if they're done right, they'll improve the impact on these societal challenges when you actually finish. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions? Oh, Mike, sorry. Hands up? No? Yes.
Well, my question to the last speaker is, in fact, IPTS, which is a center of excellence for the Commission. If I remember well, I was once invited by your institution some years ago about e-health. But of course, about the results of these meetings, not too much was applied here in Brussels by the really executing bodies. So, complementary to that remark, my question is, why are your ideas and, how would I say, not applied here in Brussels by the institutions responsible to execute what comes out of all the research and investments that are done by the Commission to bring Europe forward? Thank you.
It's not the job of the Commission to execute things.
Well,
that's really, I miss, often researchers think, oh, we've done all this research, the Commission paid for it, why aren't they doing anything with it? That's not the role of the Commission at all. The Commission funds research that then should be taken out into the world. It may go to other parts of government, to regional governments and national governments. And one that we work advising DG Connect, DG Employment, but DG Connect particularly, advising them about what should be in their research programs and what elements should be there. So this is one we have this boring format where we have these lists of recommendations saying if you're going to ask for research in this, you should also have this a paragraph that says you need to address users in XYZ way, for example, so that those who are doing research are better prepared then to transfer it into the next stage. And it's not the Commission's job to do that.
Yeah,
they try and continue looking for mechanisms in which funding mechanisms or networking mechanisms or whatever in which they can support that process, but it's not the Commission's job to take someone else's research and implement it.
Well, when I worked for the High Authority of the European Coal and Steel Community in Luxembourg, it was different. But anyway, I can say that the Commission, of course, does a lot of preparation, and it is the European Parliament that votes it in law, and it are the countries that have to execute it, and who are punished if they don't do it in time, like Belgium many times. So this excuse, that's not true. The Commission really has a power to prepare laws and things that has to be voted in European law by the Parliament. So the Commission serves at least for that as well.
Well, I think there are usually 3 people involved in making things. So now we have the third person here who's a project officer. So we'll see what she has to say.
Thank you. I think it's my turn to say something because it relates to some of the points that were raised by the JRC colleague and also this last participant. I'm very happy to say that we are taking on board a number of these issues under Horizon 2020 through something that's called Responsible Research and Innovation, and Marina gave a wonderful 5-minute overview of what that could be. So responsible research and innovation includes, let's say one of the most important pillars of it is actually multi-actor and public engagement. Now, that can take on the form of ICT-enabled engagement or face-to-face engagement. That the devil's in the detail, but I mean it favors all types of multi-actor engagement in research and innovation, not only in defining research and innovation policy, but also in promoting participatory research. So this concept of responsible research and innovation is going to be embedded in all of the pillars and societal challenges of Horizon 2020 with a threshold, a minimum threshold of budget, which means that each societal challenge and pillar is going to be monitored for their take-up of responsible research and innovation in their own programming. So for example, take health. So we expect that in the health societal challenge, they will dedicate a certain amount of their budget to taking up public engagement and multi-actor engagement. That's just one of the dimensions of responsible research and innovation. There's another 4 or 5 dimensions, including open access, including access to research results, gender in science or gendered science, and so on and so forth, and ethics, of course. Yes.
Okay, thanks very much.
So I hope that gives you something to look forward to.
Okay, good. Do we have any more questions? If not, I've got one. Yeah, I've got one for Marina and Chris. Yeah, so and what I wondered was whether, Marina, what you'd like to say. How do you think responsible research and innovation might be transformed in a world where there are so many things talking to one another? And then for Chris, yeah, how do you see your things carrying forward the responsible research and innovation agenda in some ways? Yeah, because it seemed to me that the world is changing, and So there's and responsible research and innovation is moving up the agenda in some way.
That is a really nice question. When Chris gave his talk, I was thinking about how, as you move around the world, it could make you so much more aware and sensitive to things that perhaps we're not aware of and sensitive to. Now, that might be, you might not need to be sensitive to your shoes, although, but certainly to your plants and to animals and the environment, and something being able to tell you or speak to you in that way. It starts to make the world of inanimate objects animate, and all the things that go with that in fairy tales and myths and all of that. I think it would be a really sensitizing thing for people. I think it would work really well.
Good, jolly, thank the skies. Well, I think
Chris, press your button.
Oh, sorry, I have to press the button. It didn't tell me, did it?
That's a thing, but it's not intelligent enough.
It should have told me. Big Britain. I mean, what's been fun with... I mean, it's a metaphor. It could be mythical. There's lots of fables about things talking. But it is interesting how limiting we do have roots for things. I do think we're intrinsically very teleological. In other words, the time models in us are very narrative, arc-based, cradle to grave. And data might have the potential to reroute some other patterns. So this bottle might know where it best belongs. It really might know that somebody out there is thirsty, or it might know that someone needs some flowers, a vase. It might know better than me. I mean, really, many of us, when we leave this room or leave out there, we will just leave. We will take no responsibility whatsoever, especially in shared spaces. Very few of you hate to take the gambit, but you don't turn the lights off in shared spaces because people just don't know. So trying to find a space through at which things might know what's good for them might be a call towards some ecological kind of opportunity. Having said that, I'm also acutely aware that I don't want to throw onto this another anthropocentric model, because I don't know the epistemological model. This might not believe in God. It might not believe in many of the things that we take for granted.
Thanks very much, you two. Okay, so do we have any more questions? Otherwise, I'll have to make up some more, shall I? Or maybe we could finish early. Everybody wants to finish early. I can see Marty smiling there. So, we'll have Robin and then...
A few years ago, Chris,
you need the mic.
Oh, where's the mic? Hello, Mike. A few years ago, we did a project which was a smart logistics system, and we realised we didn't want it going down the road saying, I'm a packet of diamonds, nor I'm going to De Beers. And the issues about working out about data release and management were very complex. We even asked for an extension to do an RFID-based passport, and the Greek data protection officer said that if we even tried to do it, they would arrest us because it was in collaboration with the Greek airline. So it seems to me that there are some quite complex problems here, and I think there's a kind of weird contrast between the very stark reality of that bid that got killed by the Greek data protection officer and the kind of rather kind of all singing, all embracing visions that we're getting. And I don't know how the forces of opening and the forces of constraint will interact together. But one thing I will say is that there's a kind of bias that different disciplines have. And one of the biases that computer scientists have is that freeing circulation of information will solve problems. And I think one of our conclusions is that that is not the case. Yes, that one needs to channel and sift and sort and have some idea about how to manage information. A colleague earlier said, why are we not using the real-time blood pressure or diabetes management data of the 10,000 people in Edinburgh who suffer from diabetes? I'll tell you one reason why. The doctor cannot cope even with the weekly visit from the guy. They do not want to know on a minute-by-minute basis what's happening. So we need to work out better strategies for how we don't use and don't receive and economize on information. And that's something not built in to the computational mindset always in a way that I think is useful. We sometimes need to constrain information rather than free it up.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I mean, this is quite playful. That's what designers try and do. I don't think anyone's actually addressed the 5 stack problem that we've got. 5 stacks moving into this next decade, well, this decade we're already in, and Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, and the last one, Facebook. Or did I say that?
No, you said that.
Yeah, I can never remember the 5 stacks. The 5 stacks, as we move forward, are gonna. If there is no open data, you know, all these brilliant, the list of users which are already into those stacks. I don't think we should take it for granted that the APIs that they then release are going to get us the data actually. So I can be playful, but your point is tied to a whole load of architectural issues, interoperability, the stacks, and the stacks are going to get more competitive as the pickings are going to get thinner. So yeah, absolutely, it's a critical question of how you mesh those. Don't take it for granted that things will flow.
So this gave me an idea while you were talking, which was to get each of you to say what you think the key aspect of governance is in the time going forward, because I think you have really different perspectives. So you have a kind of policy perspective, you have a free enterprise perspective, you have the design perspective, and you have an RRI perspective. So I just wondered if each of you would say what you felt the kind of key property of governance systems for this kind of environment might be going forward.
I think I did try to say that in the talk, actually. I think it should be agile and flexible, and we don't know where it's going to lie, that it could lie in a machine, it could lie in a policy, it could lie in a whole set of places, that itself has to change and be agile enough to respond to the ways in which it's embedded in society. That's what I think.
Yeah, I thought it was a terrific talk as well. I did, and you did bring up questions of time and temporality. I don't think we do understand the speed of transactions. It's way beyond a human concept of time. So I'll trust Marina on this one. That's what designers do. But I think in that space of transaction, if governance is related to the transactions, it's beyond that which we can perhaps gather, and that things are part of that decision-making process, believe it or not.
Happy? Amir, sorry. Press the button.
As you rightly said, you know, the ideal situation is that, you know, it's an open market, and Slovakian startup is really joint venturing with Italian mentor to sell their company to American M&A company, big company. But there are challenges there, and just to the tip of the iceberg, perhaps, if we want to look at crowdfunding, for example, there's so many different legislations in each country. Crowdfunding still is just a nice name that it's yet to be proven as a really a driver for funding. It will happen, I think, but it still needs a lot of legislation, support from governments and from the people that are driving it. Just to see the difference between European countries in terms of getting equity. You need to be, in some countries, you need to be a certified investor in order to buy within the crowdfunding platform. In some countries, you can be just Joe Blocks from the street. So just this, just in one angle in terms of legislation.
Okay. James?
I think one of the main concerns is who's excluded from the governance process, and how do we, with any of these new systems, make sure that all the people who are affected by it are somehow involved in that governance process. Because again, it's the question of who are the users. If we don't recognize that some people are affected by something, then we don't know to go and involve them in the process, especially if they don't have a voice. And in this field of social exclusion, there's many people who don't have a voice and don't know how to participate. And I think that's a worry.
Okay, so the takeaway message is that we need an inclusive, harmonized, agile and flexible governance environment. Thank you.